Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for another Restless Presents event, this time with Helen and Claire from My Menopause Centre. You might be surprised to hear that there are currently 15.5 million women in the UK going through some stage of the menopause transition. This is a huge portion of society going through significant physical and psychological changes that have previously been brushed under the carpet and or not taken as seriously as they should be. Of particular importance to Restless members is that because of increasing life expectancy, almost 40% of a woman's life is now spent post-menopause. And to date, it has been very difficult for women to seek relevant support and guidance about their menopause experience, whether it's pre, during, or post. But thankfully, attitudes are changing and support is becoming more readily available thanks to companies like My Menopause Centre. So tonight's webinar is all about demystifying the menopause, which is a pretty huge remit to cover in just an hour. So we'll do our best to cover it generally this evening, but we're planning on running some follow-up sessions depending on the feedback that you give us after tonight's event. Now, before I hand over to Helen and Claire, just a reminder of our usual housekeeping points. Please switch on your videos if you're comfortable to do it. It always is just a bit more personal when we can see your faces. Any technical issues, my colleague Gaetano is on hand to help. Just put any comments that you might have in the chat box underneath. And any questions throughout the presentation, please just feel free to ask them in the chat box, and Helen will address those throughout the presentation and at the end. So now over to you, Helen and Claire.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ash. Good evening, everyone. And it's great to see you. And thanks a million for joining us here this evening. So before we start our presentation, we'll just introduce myself and Claire, my good friend Claire. So my name is Helen Normoyle. I am co-founder of My Menopause Centre. We're an online website and clinic that launched about 2.5 months ago at the end of April. And I'll come on to more about what we're doing in a moment. But first of all, Claire, Dr. Claire Spencer is my good friend and fellow co-founder. Claire, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, hi. Thank you for asking us to speak this evening. It's lovely to see so many faces. I'm Dr. Claire Spencer and I'm a registered menopause specialist. I run an NHS specialist menopause clinic in Leeds, as well as being co-founder of My Menopause Centre, which is our online clinic. I'm also an NHS GP and community gynaecologist also. So really nice to talk to you this evening. And Helen's going to just fill you in a little bit more on what our website and clinic's aims are.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So we've got a deck this evening that we're going to take you through, and we're going to try and keep the presentation bit as short as possible. But what we'd like to do over the next, say, 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to hopefully share my screen. Right, can everybody see the slides? Ash or Katana, if you can give me a thumbs up. I know we're up, yes, good, over the first technical challenge for me. I'm not the most technically competent person. So we've got two things that we'd love to do with you all this evening. The first is to look at the menopause and to help demystify it. And because we believe very strongly in helping every woman to thrive through her life, whether that's love, life, compassion, and work. And we are real advocates of opening up the conversation about the menopause and getting the conversation going in homes, in families, in workplaces, and across society. And there are a few reasons why we feel so strongly about this. And Claire will share her story, I'll share mine. I realized that I was going through the menopause about 3.5, 4 years ago when I started to get very bad hot flushes. But I'd come back from summer holidays, it was September. I was a month shy of my 50th birthday. And it took me 2 weeks to join the dots and to actually even think about the fact that I might be going through the menopause. And I, used a coil as contraception. I hope you don't mind me sharing, but the reason I'm sharing it is I hadn't got a clue about my periods, didn't have time. I have 2 young kids. I was really busy at work. We just moved homes. And I was completely unprepared for what was about to happen to me. And I had a pretty challenging time between hot flushes, night sweats, lack of sleep, concentration issues, brain fog, and I found it really hard going. It took me about 18 months to find the right solution, to find the right treatment. And I found it really hard to get the right information. And Claire and I have been friends for about 10 years at this point, and I'd moved to another city. But one afternoon I was back visiting Claire in her home, and we were sitting on the sofa chatting. And I opened up to her, and she gave me a load of great information and advice. Some of it just gave me an incredible sense of relief. There was a time in my late 40s when I thought I'd early onset Alzheimer's, because my memory was, I really felt my memory was going. My grandmother had dementia when she died. And so in speaking to Claire and understanding that this was a symptom of the menopause, which I hadn't recognized, it was only 2 years on that I started again to join the dots. It gave me such a sense of relief to know that there was a reason for it. I wasn't going mad, I hadn't lost the plot, and that there was actually something that I could do about it. So we then got chatting around, why is it so hard for women to find the right information, to find the right treatment, to get the right support that they need? I initially went to my GP. That wasn't particularly helpful. I went private. I went back and I spoke to Claire, got some great advice for her. And now I would say 3-4 years on, I've got, the right things in terms of, I'm taking HRT, but I'm also exercising, meditating, and I've really changed how I live my life. And I suppose the reason we're so passionate around having this conversation and raising awareness is by opening up and speaking to friends and family, but also by looking at all of the research that's out there. It's clear, and I'll share with you some of the research that we did in April. It's here that many women are struggling as they go through the menopause, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so we really want to help as many women as we can with the evidence-based information and advice and support that we have on our website, and through having webinars and conversations like this evening. And some of you have sent in questions already, and we'll address those at the end. And I can say this because Claire would never say this about herself, but she is a really brilliant doctor. She's the kindest, nicest person I know. And she is incredibly smart and knowledgeable, thank God, about all things menopause. And it's, it's a privilege to work with somebody like her. And it's great to have her here today. And she has had a full-on day in the NHS in her GP practice. And she's come on this evening. She's full of beans and raring to go. So Claire, do you want to share just a little bit of your story about, what sparked your passion for the menopause and having these conversations?
Oh, thanks, Helen. How do you follow that? No, absolutely. So I have always had a passion for women's health. I think it's really important that we understand what's going on in our bodies, from contraception to pregnancy to dealing with periods to hormones. And in general practice, I could see that there was a massive gap in knowledge amongst GPs, amongst women, in the menopause. There are so many myths that people were still believing in. The evidence is really hard to decipher. We're going to have a go at doing that this evening. And so I really felt passionate that I really wanted to learn more and qualify as a menopause specialist, able to fully understand all the evidence inside and out myself, and then be able to communicate that for women to really make the right decision for themselves as to whether they wanted to take HRT or not. Because so many people I was seeing were suffering with hot flushes, we'll go through the symptoms in a second, but not getting the right advice. So it all sparked from there. I'm in my late 40s, I'm almost 50, mid 40s, very busy, 3 children, full on job, started to feel extra frazzled, didn't realize it was the perimenopause, took a friend to realize it was the perimenopause, started HRT and haven't looked back. So, Helen and I just want that advice to come to as many people, as many women as we can reach, and hence writing the website in completely understandable, evidence-based information, and then run the clinic from there as well. So hopefully you'll get a taste of that this evening as we're talking and sharing our slides with you, and completely delighted to take any questions at the end that you might have.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Claire. So moving on to the next slide then. Yes, so as Ash has already said, There are 15.5 million women today at some stage of the menopause transition. And by that, we mean either the perimenopause, the menopause, or the postmenopause. And postmenopausal life is really important. And Claire will come to that in a moment. If there are any people dialing in for the Republic of Ireland, there are about 900,000 women in the Republic of Ireland who are in some stage of the menopause transition as well. Now, what's really important to understand is that most women will experience symptoms to some degree. That's around 8 in 10. On average, a woman will experience 7 symptoms, not necessarily all at the same time. These can be spread out over several years. These symptoms can usually last 4 to 8 years, can be up to 12 years. Claire will tell you, in a little while. She has patients with symptoms in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I think that's an important myth to bust, because I know many women think or believe that the symptoms will go after 6 months or 12 months, or they'll stop once their periods have stopped, but that's not necessarily the case. For some women, for some lucky women, that is the case, but for most, not. Now, if you're on the call this evening, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you why the menopause matters, but we're framing it in this way. So when you're speaking to friends and families, or if you're speaking at work, to help you with the information and the evidence around it. So we did some research with over a nationally representative sample of over 2,000 people in April and May of this year with a brilliant research agency called Britain Thinks. That was with men and women up and down the country. And when we looked at the results from the women who had gone through or were going through the menopause, we found that only 1 in 4 said that they were prepared for the menopause, and that has considerable negative impacts on their lives. So just over half underestimated the physical symptoms of the menopause, over half underestimated the emotional symptoms of the menopause. 84% agreed that the women's experience of the menopause can have a negative impact on her relationships at home. 77% agree that it can impact negatively her performance at work. 67% it can negatively impact her career. And 46% of the women we spoke to said they feel under pressure just to cope with the symptoms of the menopause. And a quarter, and that's a hell of a lot of women, felt more isolated as a result. So again, these are pretty stark results to see. And it's clear from that then that there are really strong personal, social, and economic consequences for this. Again, if we look at data from the Samaritans, we can see that suicide rates in women are highest between the age of 50 and 55. Clearly, that's not all down to the menopause, but the menopause will play a role in that. Women aged 45 to 54 are the group most commonly to report work-related stress. Again, it's not all going to be down to the menopause, but it will play a role in it as well. And there are over 4.3 million women aged 50 to 65 in the workplace. Many of them are in senior roles at this stage in their careers. And the symptoms of the menopause, if a woman, is struggling to get control of them, can have a really adverse impact on engagement, performance, and attendance at work. So we've just got some data here that shows the average number of days missed every year due to symptoms. That's around 3.27. Symptoms are described as impacting confidence and impacting performance. And, again, depending on the study one reads, we see that anywhere from 5 to 25% of women say they've considered leaving their jobs altogether. I mean, that's an incredibly sad statistic, I think, to look at that. And when we look at all of the data and the reporting around the gender pay gap, between men and women in their 40s and 50s, women leaving the workforce in this age group will definitely be a factor. And the British Medical Association, the BMA, did some research with 2,000 doctors a couple of years ago. And even with women doctors, they are struggling with these issues as well, to have the conversations at work and to get the support that they need. Again, we see from research that around 5% of women have left or are leaving the workforce. Now, if you're leaving because you want to, and it's a life choice that you're making, clearly that's your choice. But if you're leaving because you feel you're not getting support, or you're struggling with the symptoms of your menopause, that is a really sad situation, and it doesn't have to be that way. Again, from our research, we saw that knowledge really is power. The women that we spoke to who said that they felt prepared for the menopause as they went into it, they tend to cope better and feel more positive about it. So they're more likely to say that the menopause can be a positive change in women's life. They're less likely to say that they feel under pressure. They're less likely to say that they feel more isolated. They're less likely to say that, the menopause can have a negative impact on a woman's career and so on. So hence the importance of events like this evening, when you understand what's happening to your body, when you understand the range of treatment options that are available to you, when you understand, how you can ask for the support that you need. So whether it's from your partner, your children, your parents, brothers, sisters, friends, family, your manager at work, you can have a much better experience of the menopause. And that's really important. One of the things that really brought it home for me was in doing this research, and Claire had this data in a slide that she was giving to some doctors in the NHS. In 1921, life expectancy at birth for a woman was 59 years. And a woman typically went through the menopause at the age of 57. And that's only 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, 3 to 4% of a woman's life was spent postmenopausal. If we fast forward to today and look at life expectancy for a woman in her 50s today, so like maybe many of us on this call this evening, we can expect to live to be around an average of 87 years. So in other words, close to 40% of our lives, and that number is increasing. And if we look at, those of us who have daughters or the next generations of women, they will live even longer. So we owe it to ourselves to invest in our health so that at this midpoint in our lives, we really are preparing ourselves to live our best lives and have a brilliant next half. Think of all the things we've learned from our 20s, 30s, and maybe 40s, all the mistakes we've made, the things that we would never do again. We can bring all of that wisdom and all of that insight into the second half to really make it the better one. So with that, I'll now hand over to Claire, who's going to take you through kind of the key facts and insights around the menopause and how to treat it.
Oh, thank you, Helen. So really, what does the menopause mean? Well, menopause comes from menos, pause, end of monthly bleeding, but it's really not as straightforward as that. And we think of it more as a transition. So if we just think about what's happening in our bodies, Helen, are you able to move the slide on? Thank you. So in terms of what's happening, if you focus here on the orange wiggly line, and that's an approximation of what's happening in terms of the estrogen levels in our body. And this is the hormone made by our ovaries that affects probably every single system. So the pre-menopause really officially starts at puberty, when we start our periods. And for most women, the estrogen will flow up and down rhythmically every month, and most people will have a monthly period as a consequence. Now, when you start to hit your early to mid 40s for most women, what happens is that feedback mechanism, keeping that nice rhythm, starts to break down. And so the estrogen levels start to fluctuate wildly. Your ovaries don't produce estrogen quite so reliably. You don't ovulate every month most of the time. So you can see that it can swing wildly up and down, and that can trigger symptoms of the menopause. And the overall level in the perimenopause is also lower. So often people don't realize that symptoms that they're experiencing are menopause related, because they might be still bleeding, and actually they might be really quite young, so in the early to mid 40s, but could be experiencing symptoms that sort of creep up on you insidiously. So a little bit of low-grade anxiety that just maybe makes you think that you're not coping. You might be having some hot flushes, and then they just completely go away for a few months. Periods might stop for a bit, might come back to it for a bit, periods might change. So that's the perimenopause, which is often under-recognized, and women end up being treated for depression or end up making changes because they think they're not coping, when actually if they got the right help, as I was lucky to, actually they can carry on doing 90 million trillion billion things and juggling as they want to. The menopause is officially when your periods have stopped for a year, not taking hormones, and that's really important. So the menopause is defined as having no period for 1 year, and then you're just zooming into the postmenopausal phase, which is really the rest of your life. And at this time, the ovaries have stopped making estrogen completely, and the estrogen level drops and stays low. Although the average age of the menopause in this country is 51, about 1% of women will have an early menopause under the age of 40, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, can be devastating if you haven't completed your family. And then symptoms, as we'll come on to in a second, can linger from that point. It's sadly from that day after a year of no period, it doesn't mean that everything suddenly gets better. So if we just go on to the next slide to look at actually what the symptoms are that we're talking about. Some of them are really well known. I'm sure everybody associates hot flushes and night sweats with the menopause. And around 8 out of 10 women will experience them. They'll be severe in some, not for others. And for many women, so around 5% of women, will continue to have hot flushes that last for 15, 20 years and longer. And as Helen said, I have got patients in my menopause clinic in their late 70s, in their 80s, one lady in her late 80s still on HRT, because when you stop it, the hot flushes just continue for some women. In terms of physical symptoms, there are some that you'll heard of and some that you won't. So there are some real weird and wonderful symptoms. For example, the feeling of spiders crawling over your skin, or I had a lady who really vividly described a feeling of a spider's web over her face, which is a medical phenomenon called formication with an M. Got better with HRT. Many of the physical symptoms are related. So, for example, weight gain is really common. The way your metabolism changes makes you more prone to gain weight and deposit fat around your middle, which is a highly depressing thought. But actually aches and pains also, and then aches and pains stop people exercising, weight gain gets worse. Sometimes people just put up with some of the symptoms thinking it's due to aging, like some bladder issues, for example. But actually you can do plenty. There are plenty of things you can do to help them. Just in terms of psychological symptoms, actually these are the things that people often don't realise are menopause associated. And so mood changes are incredibly common. When your estrogen level drops, so does your serotonin, and that's the happy hormone in your brain. And so with the drop of serotonin, you can get all the subtle and less subtle changes of irritability. Anxiety is heightened. I would argue anxiety is almost as common as hot sweats when you really ask people about it. Brain fog is so common. The way different bits of your brain communicate with each other changes and is not as good as it was before. Word finding is a big issue because there are estrogen receptors who knew in the word finding bit of your brain. Poor concentration, lack of motivation, sleep issues, fatigue, can I go on? And so people will say to me things like, I just can't drive on the motorway anymore. I'm used to driving up and down the M1, I just can't. I've had women who've left their husbands, left their jobs, and again with the right treatment have come back completely different women saying, oh my goodness, don't know what planet I was on, and could realize in retrospect that actually changes were menopause related. And so just in terms of sexual function, there's no surprise to see here. I mean, loss of libido is so common. Although recent surveys suggest about 50% of women suffer loss of libido, I would say in my clinic it's closer to 80 or 90. It's really unusual that somebody says, oh, no problems with libido. And obviously that's related to any of the above symptoms that you can see on the slide, but also vaginal dryness is so common and it's so easy to treat. The vagina loses its stretch, it loses its moisture, the tissue down below becomes delicate, sensitive, itchy, and so lo and behold, why would you want to have sex if your vagina is feeling slightly unpleasant, to say the least? But again, people are often too embarrassed to come forward and talk about it. And it's often not until I ask that people do admit it. And again, it's really easy to treat with vaginal estrogens, vaginal moisturizers, lubrication. So I would urge you, if you are experiencing those symptoms, to come forward. People commonly say, I had last had sex probably 5 years ago because it was too painful and I just didn't do anything about it, and I'm really sad that that bit of my relationship has gone. And it's so sad because there are plenty of things that you can do to help. Just moving on to the next slide, it won't be surprising then to see that, just following on from what Helen said, of the numbers of people wanting to leave jobs, take step down in roles, which I see all the time, you know, head teachers turning into teachers, teachers saying, you know, they just don't want to do it anymore. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but not if it's because of symptoms that can be treatable. So, you know, difficulty concentrating, forgetfulness, memory issues, low mood, low self-esteem, low confidence, and fatigue. And then just thinking about that orange line that you could see just continuing into the middle distance and beyond at the post-menopause, we know that the loss of estrogen can have significant impacts on our long-term health. So the risk of heart disease significantly increases after the menopause, and that has a far, far greater impact than breast cancer. We know osteoporosis, the impact is huge. Fractures, fragility fractures have really high chance of causing long-term changes in life, basically, and increased mortality. So osteoporosis is a big issue. Vaginal symptoms I've talked about. If you don't treat them, they can just continue to get worse as you gain years. And bladder symptoms also. The bladder lies over the vagina, and the loss of estrogen can affect the bladder also, causing having to go to the loo more often, getting up in the night, and irritability. So having to rush to the loo at 90 miles an hour to get there. So all of these significant issues can continue into the postmenopause if nothing's done. So that's the doom and gloom. So just in terms of what can we do? So as you saw from Helen's slide, it's fascinating, isn't it? That actually knowledge really is power, that if you understand what's happening to your body, actually your experience of the menopause can be slightly, marginally or significantly diminished. In terms of tackling each of these areas, I'm just going to skim over. We could spend a whole day talking about each of these areas, but so lifestyle factors significantly impact. They significantly impact on your experience of symptoms and also postmenopausal health. So there's no surprises here. Diet and weight management, really important to fight that weight gain, and it is possible. You might lose weight more slowly, but you can lose weight in the menopause. Exercise is super important for mental well-being, reduce risk of heart disease, reduce risk of osteoporosis. You don't have to run a marathon. It's just getting out and moving. Making sure you're practicing good sleep hygiene. There's loads of information on our website. Don't smoke, makes hot flushes worse. Alcohol makes everything worse. Hot flushes, risk of cancer, mental health issues, the lot, although it is very nice. In terms of mental well-being, then, as Helen's alluded to, so meditation can help. So just calming your frazzled mind, calming that anxiety. So for some people, meditation will be helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy, there is lots of great evidence that can help experience of hot flushes and most psychological symptoms of the menopause. Speaking to others, taking time for yourself when life is busy. Alternative therapies, from a doctor's point of view, there isn't a lot of hardcore evidence that many of them help, but you know, people come saying acupuncture has. Never say never. It's wherever you can find the benefit. And then in terms of medical or non-HRT medical options, so antidepressants do have a place. Often they get prescribed instead of HRT by GPs when actually HRT may be better. But for women who don't want to take HRT or have been advised not to, antidepressants can take the edge off hot flushes and can help with some of the psychological symptoms. Clonidine is a blood pressure tablet, which actually is licensed for help with hot flushes. And there are a few others, types of non-hormone medicines, not licensed, but can be used if HRT is not for you. But then the biggie is HRT. And everybody will have seen headlines like these over the years. They recurred a couple of years ago. In 2002, it's where it really all stemmed from. 2002, there was publication of a really big randomized controlled trial study called the Women's Health Initiative Study. And the initial portrayal of the statistics was such that everybody virtually stopped HRT. Everybody, you know, HRT can double the risk of breast cancer. The headlines frightened GPs, they frightened women, and the use of HRT fell off a log. Over the years, it's really interesting. Subsequent analysis of that same data has shown that actually the risks are not as high as we ever thought they were. There were flaws in the data, and the way that the statistics were portrayed was just not helpful, because when you look at the absolute numbers meant that actually the vast majority of women did not get breast cancer, and I'll talk to you about those in a minute. So actually over the years, I think HRT, people are less frightened of HRT. And so although I hear in the clinic all the time, I'm too nervous about the risk of breast cancer, I don't want to pump my body full of chemicals, actually, as you'll see on the next slide that I'll talk through, the risks are actually small. So just moving on, we're going to look at some of the myths of HRT. In terms of HRT causing breast cancer, if we move on to the next slide, Helen's prepared this really helpful slide. So just to talk you through it, this is results from the Women's Health Initiative study, where women were randomized to have a placebo, so no medicine, or HRT. And this was older HRT, this was synthetic. Now, the baseline risk of breast cancer for women in their 50s and over the next 5 years would be 23 cases per 1,000. So that's no HRT, all comers, 23 cases per 1,000 risk of breast cancer diagnosis. For the women who were overweight and obese, actually that more than doubled the risk of breast cancer. So there were 24 cases of breast cancer diagnosed over 5 years. If you drink 2 units of alcohol a day, which is a small to medium glass of wine, it's 2 units of 2-shot gin and tonic, it's a pint of beer. Actually, there were 5 extra cases per 1,000 of breast cancer. And for women who took the older synthetic HRT, there were 4 extra cases per breast cancer. And just look at that in relation to drinking wine and being overweight and obese. And the important thing here to realize is this is not the newer bioidentical types of hormones which are matched to our own hormones. This was older synthetic HRT, and we know from subsequent studies the risk is lower with the bioidentical types of HRT than the figures here. And actually women who've had a hysterectomy, who only need to take one of the hormones in HRT, the estrogen, there is little or no increased risk of breast cancer over 5 years. The study showed 4 fewer cases of breast cancer. I think it's rash to say it reduces your risk, but certainly no increase. And exercising reducing the risk as well. So same data from the headlines, better portrayal of the statistics. And just to finish off with some of the other myths of HRT that I hear in the clinic, HRT causes blood clots. Yes, it does if you swallow estrogen. There's a small increased risk of blood clots, but not if you have the estrogen through your skin as a patch, as gel, as spray. There is absolutely no evidence that HRT causes weight gain, which I hear a lot of women being really worried about. HRT does not press the pause button on your menopause. It doesn't delay the inevitable. It treats your symptoms as you're going through in time. So when you stop HRT, you'll feel how you were meant to feel at that age anyway. And herbal methods are not necessarily better or safer. They're generally not regulated. They are pharmacologically active, and there can be risks associated with them as well. And as I've said, most of the HRT I prescribe on the NHS and in the menopause clinic is bioidentical, which is lower risk than the older synthetic options. So that was a 92 million mile an hour canter through HRT and the menopause. And just to hand back over to Helen, I think to just round up where we feel that we're at in terms of where we are today with the clinic.
Great, thank you, Claire. And we did more of a deep dive into HRT because because as Claire has shown, it's one of the key ways of treating the symptoms of the menopause, and yet there are still so many concerns about it. And our philosophy, and I'm not a doctor, but Claire and the other doctors in our clinic, our overall philosophy is about providing women with the, scientifically proven information and advice so that every woman can make the choice that's best for her. And that really is the key thing in all of this, but at least you're able then to make a choice on the basis of the evidence and the facts, and not on hearsay and myth and misinformation. Hence the real focus on HRT on that one. So thank you very much for that, Claire. So we are now going to take some questions. I'm going to come out of SlideShare. I am going to stop sharing my screen here. Some of you have submitted some questions in advance, so we're going to start going through those while you think about maybe other questions that we have and we can take in the room. So I've grouped the questions thematically. So Claire, I'm going to kick off with a question from a lady who's got questions about some of the physical symptoms in particular of the menopause. So this lady says she's turning 52 in September and she's never felt so unwell. I was finally identified as perimenopausal in December. I'm still coming to terms with it, and I've had 2 changes of HRT meds since then. I've lost me. I'm exhausted all the time. All I can manage is my job. I can't even walk my dogs after work. I'm only just getting back on my weight, so I can't afford a dog walker to help. So again, I mean, this lady, if you're on the call this evening, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for asking this question. And I'm really sorry to hear that you're going through such a tough time. So Claire, what advice or what recommendations could you give this lady?
Yes, and I too am really sorry that you haven't found the right solution yet to feel better. So I think the first thing would be, if you've tried 2 different types of HRT already, I obviously don't know where you are geographically, but I would go back to your HRT and say that you're still struggling, and maybe ask if there's a specialist menopause clinic in your area. They are in most parts of the country. There is an NHS clinic that you could be referred into, or gynecologists with an interest in the menopause. In terms of going back to your GP, it might be worth just asking the receptionist who they would speak to for HRT menopause advice, and just make sure that you're speaking to the right HRT in your practice who's got the expertise. So I would work harder with a doctor to maybe try a different type of HRT. I would speak to your GP just to make sure that you've had checks to make sure there's nothing else going on other than the menopause. So make sure you're not anemic, make sure your thyroid function is okay. And then it's really easy, isn't it, to say, look at lifestyle. I hear you're working out. It's brilliant that you're walking your dogs. Don't stop moving. Don't stop trying to get outside if you can. But I would maybe go back and ask about different types of HRT, adjust the dose. And for some women, energy can be helped with a tiny little bit of testosterone as well, which is another reason why it would be worth asking for a referral to a menopause clinic, because often GPs won't prescribe it. So I really hope that helps, and I really hope that you feel better soon.
Thank you, Claire. And I think, as you've mentioned that you're working, it might be worth having a conversation with your employer about the support that they can provide you with, and if there's any adjustments they can make in the workplace for you. So whether that's, maybe you're already working from home in COVID. I mean, it's all a bit up in the air, isn't it? But in terms of, when you start your work or anything else, and Elise at Restless has just posted, we've worked with her to post some advice and guidance on how to get support and things that you can look to do in the workplace as well. So there might be some support available for you there too. So I really hope you find the right solution and the right treatment plan. And we've got lots of information on HRT on our website. So if you need some backup for going into your GP, feel free to hop on and have a look. So the next kind of related question about the menopause is more around some of the other physical symptoms. So this lady again is 52. She says she thought she was through the menopause, but the sweats have started again. And she says she also has osteopenia. So you might explain that, Claire, to people as well. I'm 52, but I feel like 92. My doctor seems reluctant to offer up HRT. Is there any other help out there? So there's a couple of questions here, isn't there? One is HRT a good solution? And two, if it is, how do I get my doctor to prescribe it for me?
I know. Yeah, sorry, I'm rolling my eyes because I hear this a lot. Okay, so osteopenia is where your bones are slightly reduced in density, but they're not osteoporotic. So osteoporosis is where the bone density decreases. So the bones look the same for all intents and purposes, but they're just a little tiny bit more fragile. So osteopenia is not osteoporosis, but the bones are just a bit thinner than normal. In terms of getting HRT, and HRT, so the estrogen in HRT is a really good way of preventing that. There's lots of evidence to show that HRT helps prevent osteoporosis and helps prevent fractures as a result of osteoporosis. So HRT might stop it getting worse and actually might make it better. In terms of having the conversation with your GP, obviously I don't know your full medical history to know if there are any other issues. I would say, as I just said, find out which GP in your practice is the most menopause friendly, menopause knowledgeable, HRT knowledgeable GP. On our website, we've developed a questionnaire where you put all your symptoms in, and it gives you a result that shows you sort of where you are, whether you are in the menopause transition, with advice on all the symptoms. And taking that to your GP could also be helpful. It's based on the green climacteric scale, which again is on our website. And again, if you take it and wave it in front of your GP, and also ask them why. Ask them to tell you exactly why they won't give you HRT. What is the exact reason and what is the evidence behind their decision? So don't be afraid to challenge your GP. And I can say that because I am a GP. And so I would say don't be afraid to go and question their decision.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for that very honest feedback. And again, I really hope that you'll find the right solution, because that must just feel horrible to feel so absolutely knackered. Now, while we're on the subject of HRT, there are a few HRT related questions that have come up in the chat, so I'm just going to weave them in now, Claire. One of the practical questions is, it might be worth spending in a moment about talking the difference between synthetic and bioidentical, and how you know if you're being prescribed a synthetic or a bioidentical HRT.
Okay. So synthetic types of HRT are hormones that are active. They plug your hormone receptors, but they're not the same as your own hormones biochemically. So 99% of the estrogen that's prescribed is bioidentical. It's estradiol, and that's the estrogen in most of the tablets now, in the patches and in the gels and the spray. The only estrogen that is not bioidentical is in Premarin, so that's Premiq, Prempac products, and that's conjugated equine estrogen, which is derived from horse's urine. So that's the horse HRT. Now, if you've got a womb, you need another hormone called progestogen. And that's because estrogen can thicken the lining of the womb and progestogen thins the lining of the womb. And that's important because if your womb lining thickens, it can cause womb cancer. So the progestogen, there is only one bioidentical type of progestogen, and it's a capsule that you swallow at night, and it's called Utrogestan, beginning with a U. And the advantage of that is it matches your own progesterone, and it can help you sleep, and it can help knock the edge off anxiety for some women. All the other types of progestogen are synthetic. They are all effective. In the tablets, Femiston is the closest to bioidentical HRT. And the final thing to say is there was a big study looking at the risk of breast cancer and the type of progestogen that was used. And the bioidentical Utrogestan and the almost bioidentical Femiston had the lowest risk of breast cancer compared with the other types of HRT. So do you think, is that clear enough? Sorry, it's quite a lot of information to take in, but two hormones basically, and there's only one bioidentical progestogen, and most of the estrogen is bioidentical.
Yeah, no, thank you, Claire. There's quite a few more coming in, so I guess a couple of things. Two, Ash, I think you guys are going to put the video up on your website as well. And two, all of the information that Claire's just outlined is available on our website as well in the HRT section. If you didn't get a chance to take all the notes, it lists kind of all the products in all the different ways that they're provided, and we explain in a lot of detail there as well, more about bioidentical. So if we can take the next two quickly, Claire, and then I'll come to some of the other questions, because there are lots of symptoms related questions in here as well. So another few related questions, I think, are if I give them to you in a group, at what stage is it useful to start on HRT? How long can I take it for? And do I need to stop at a certain age?
Yeah, okay. So in a nutshell, if you start HRT early in the menopause, you get the greatest benefit. So if you start HRT under the age of 60 or within 10 years of the menopause, then it reduces your risk of heart disease, and it reduces your risk of dying from heart disease. It reduces your risk of osteoporosis. In terms of how long to take it for, I think that's a really personal decision. Year on year, there will be a very small increased risk of breast cancer, but it is very small. Most people won't get breast cancer, but you are continuing to get the benefits. So rule of thumb, the benefits greatly outweigh the risks in your 50s. As you go into your 60s, it depends a little bit then on your background medical history, but you do not have to stop it. The problem with a lot of menopause management and HRT evidence is there is a complete lack of evidence. So it's a really personal decision. You don't have to stop it at any age. You can carry on with it for as long as you want to, as long as you accept those small risks, because you will continue to get the benefits.
Yeah. And Claire, can you start? No, that it does. And then just one last one related to this. Can you start it at any age as well? So could you start HRT in your mid to late 50s?
Yes, no, absolutely. So if you start it after 10 years of the start of the menopause or after the age of 60, you won't get the cardiovascular benefit. But the evidence is that it shouldn't increase your risk of heart disease, which is an old worry with HRT. When women are starting it much later on, so for example, today I've started it in a 72-year-old and a 74-year-old, there are slight risks that may be creeping in. If you've had time to build up any plaques in your blood vessels, there may be a risk that if you add estrogen, it might rupture, but that's why we give tiny doses of estrogen, like a quarter of a patch, for example.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And that last HRT related question, and I'll switch over to the symptom related questions. Can you take HRT if you're taking antidepressants?
Yes, you absolutely can. Yeah.
Okay, good. And then, sorry, I'm going to take these two, they've just come in. My doctor advised 5 years maximum for HRT and no longer than that. I know what you're going to say, but you need to say it.
Oh, sorry. I hear this a lot as well. No, you don't have to stop it at 5 years. You don't have to stop it at 60. Just understand that basically the longer you take HRT for, the year-on-year small increased risk of breast cancer.
But from a small base, as you said before. And then this lady, Claire, thank you for your question. What if you had an endometrial ablation at the age of 40 and you're now 57? Is it safe to take HRT?
Oh, 100%, completely. So endometrial ablation is where you frazzle the lining of the womb as a treatment for heavy periods. And a lot of women don't bleed after that. So you wouldn't necessarily know when you've been through the menopause, but that doesn't matter. The treatment is always the same, and you can take HRT. Yeah.
Brilliant. And last one, these HRT questions keep popping in, so, and then I will go to symptoms because I know we've just got 10 minutes left. Does having hypertension affect being able to take HRT?
No, it doesn't, as long as your hypertension is controlled. So uncontrolled hypertension is one of the few contraindications to HRT. Oral estrogen can marginally push your blood pressure up, but having estrogen through your skin doesn't affect it at all, and it might even help it marginally. So as long as it's controlled, no.
Okay, great. Thanks, Claire. So I've got several symptoms related questions that I'm going to throw at you. You might feel a bit like mastermind, Claire, so apologies, just so we get to cover them all before we finish up. So great question here again. Thank you very much for everyone who's submitted them. What's the best way to combat tiredness, weight gain and moods? If HRT doesn't suit, what are the alternatives?
Yeah, so I would look to lifestyle. I would look at how much exercise you're doing, and look at Helen's smiling because it's a recurrent theme, and look at diet, look at alcohol, which is a depressant. Antidepressants do have a pace to play if your symptoms are really interfering with life. In terms of weight gain is tricky, but particularly if you're feeling low and your motivation is lacking, which is really natural and really common in the menopause, I would say it's just making tiny changes that you can sustain. If you carry on eating exactly the way in your 50s and 60s as you did in your 40s, you will gain on average, well, you will gain weight because your metabolic rate drops and you lose muscle mass. And so it's looking at ways to tweak your diet, reducing carbohydrates if you can, and increasing protein, because how your body handles carbohydrate changes and makes you more likely to put spare carbohydrates on round your middle as fat. So tiny changes that you can sustain and aim for slow weight decrease and try and hang on in there. Talking therapies can really help as well. I said, so cognitive behavioral therapy, counseling, sharing your story, sharing your symptoms, that can all help also.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. We have another question here then on what's going on in our bodies when we're producing so much extra heat. I wonder if you could maybe do this very quickly and maybe point to the website, because we explain it all there, just so we can, just in the interest of time.
Yes, no, absolutely. So in a nutshell, your thermoregulation bit of your brain doesn't work. And so what that means is at a lower temperature, you'll feel hotter. You'll feel as if you're in the Sahara Desert for a really small change of body temperature. Like for some people, drinking a hot cup of tea, for example. Some people also will experience that when they're anxious. And then also, people don't often talk about feeling cold. So again, you'll feel freezing cold at higher temperatures, and it's all to do with the temperature regulation bit in your hypothalamus.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think what we've discussed before, Claire, is that HRT is one of the most effective ways to treat hot flushes, and I mean, it certainly was. It certainly was for me. Question here then from a lady whose hair is very sadly falling out. What can she do to look after it? And then she's calling out, how tough it is to wear a face mask when you're having hot flushes in buses and trains.
Oh,
I know. Been there with that as well.
Yeah, and hot flush with face mask, you'll get that horrible panicky feeling. And the key thing is to take 3 deep breaths and think this will pass. I know it's really easy to say, it's really hard to do on the tube in a face mask, but yeah, that's tough. Hair loss isn't all hormone related. So for some women, really briefly, hair loss is related to the change in balance of hormones as you go through the menopause. And if it is specifically related to that balance change, then HRT potentially can help. But I'm not going to lie, it's not a quick fix. It doesn't help everybody. Some people are genetically programmed to lose their hair as they gain years, so looking to family members, and that's tricky. In terms of looking after your hair, if that's the case, then there are gentle hair products out there. Caffeine shampoo, there's bits and bobs of evidence. Regain, you can buy over the counter, it's quite expensive. That's a scalp preparation that can help. All of these are listed in the hair loss bit on the website. But hair loss can be incredibly distressing, and it is common, but it's not all hormone related. And make sure your GPs check your thyroid function and your iron, because low iron can also not help hair loss.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Then a very quick one. Is vertigo a symptom of the menopause?
Yeah, so I see loads of women with vertigo in the menopause clinic, but just a really quick literature search, it is more common as you gain years. So there are bits and bobs of evidence suggesting there might be a link, but it's not strong evidence. And I have to say, I haven't seen HRT help. I think the issue is it does become more common but you can get dizziness in the menopause. You know, that is a menopause symptom, but that's more like light-headed, fuzzy feeling rather than vertigo, which is when the world is swinging around you and you feel sick.
Thank you, Claire. So Debbie has started a trend here. Debbie's friend. Debbie is smiling, I think. Debbie's friend has started a train of questions on the chat about a series relating to libido. And does HRT help with libido? And various other questions related to it. I know, Ash, you want to come in with a question as well, and there's a question on bladder, strengthening bladder post-menopause. So what I'd suggest is if we take the libido question and Ash's question, and if we get more feedback, Ash, I know you're going to put out a questionnaire. As Ash said at the beginning, there's a lot to cover in an overview session, but we can come back, you know, maybe after the summer holidays and do a deep dive on some of the symptoms that are of particular interest. And so maybe around libido, sexual, so vaginal dryness and bladder symptoms, because we know, Claire, don't we, that they're the toughest ones to talk about in terms of people feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, but really, really important to have the conversation. So do you want to answer the question around, you know, can HRT help with libido? And if not, what will help or what you would recommend?
Oh, right. In 3 sentences, quickly. Okay. Right. Okay. So the first bit of the answer is HRT can help libido. It can help if you generally feel better about yourself. If you generally feel better about yourself, then you generally feel better about having sex, and then that can definitely help. Estrogen probably plugs directly into bits of your brain that control libido as well, and it can help like that. And HRT, particularly vaginal estrogens that have none of the risks of taking HRT, can help vaginal symptoms, and again that can help libido. And when I say libido, I mean sex drive. I mean the desire to start having sex, because what happens in the menopause is that initial desire can fall off a log, but actually the physical bit of it, the arousal can actually stay as it was. So it's just getting over that initial bit. There is a bit of a positive feedback mechanism that goes on as well. So, and we're not suggesting that you have sex if you don't want to have sex. But if you have some form of physical contact with your partner and that turns into something else, there is a positive feedback that sort of the more you use it, the more you want to have it. And that old, if you don't use it, you lose it, can occur. You know, just losing the intimacy is a really important factor in all of this. So women lose their libido, think, right, that's it. And then all physical intimacy is lost. And then it's really hard to get that back. So I know one of my colleagues in response to this question would say she prescribes a hug a day, you know, just to keep that physical intimacy going. And Sue, our lovely, lovely sex therapist, talks very much about embracing the new and embracing it in a positive way. So yes, things might be, and I talk about myself here, you know, things might be getting a little bit more saggy and not as they were 10 or 15 years ago, but you know, just embrace it and just use it as a time to change and try out new things and sex toys, dare I say it, and, you know, sort of embracing rather than turning away from it. Oh, that is my wisdom. Testosterone can help as well. So testosterone, most GPs won't prescribe, but that can just plug the extra few receptors that might need plugging for some women. But I have to say, although I prescribe loads of testosterone and it does help some women, it's not like the panacea. You know, if you have stopped physically connecting with your husband, testosterone is not suddenly going to make the magic happen again. You know, you do have to communicate and talk to each other. Whether it's a male partner, female partner, it doesn't matter. The issues are all the same. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, thank you, Claire. And Sue Macon, who's the sex therapist that we work with, she has this lovely concept of finding your love language. And so again, we've just posted some content on sex libido and still having great sex at any age. And in doing our research for this, I have to say it was I found it very educational. I learned loads. So we've got lots of good advice there, and everything from lubes to sex toys, to intimacy and relationships and HRT as well. So all good fun. So Ash, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. We've had a direct message through. So one of the ladies on the webinar tonight has had a heart attack in February this year, and she'd just been prescribed HRT patches when it happened. She hadn't started them yet, but she's been told she can't take them now or even continue with her vaginal estrogen pessaries because of the heart attack. She's gone on to say that she's been referred to a menopause clinic. The GP has completely outsourced it, basically saying that they're far better placed to advise her on whether she can have HRT or not. But her place, she's just found out that, she's also having migraines, cyclical migraines, but her referral has now been lost, and she's just feeling like she's feeling a little, well, she said she's feeling very despondent and what to do next.
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that, and especially if the referral's been lost, that's rubbish. Well, definitely get them to reactivate it, and finding out where the clinic is and phoning the admin staff, phoning the secretaries and asking for cancellations could be a top tip as well. So one of the contraindications to HRT is acute phase myocardial infarction. But actually, once you're over it and once you're stable, it's not an absolute contraindication to HRT. There was a study published a few years ago showing that women who had an HRT after a heart attack didn't increase the risk of having another one. So it won't be a definite no. It will, obviously, you need to have a discussion about your own situation and what's going on. But it, you know, if you came to my clinic, it wouldn't be a definite no, and so I suspect it will be the same. And it's great that you have been referred to a menopause clinic. In terms of vaginal estrogens, again, obviously I don't know exactly what's going on for you, but I would question that because you hardly absorb any estrogen from a vaginal estrogen, particularly the low dose preparations. So you might want them to just reconsider that. Sometimes menopause clinics will offer advice and guidance. And so, a quick email of your GP to the menopause clinic could solve that one for you. But it isn't a complete contraindication, and you could potentially have your vaginal estrogen while you're waiting for the menopause clinic appointment.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. So I know we haven't got to all the questions. We'll pick up and look at them, but I think there's been some more questions that's just come in, somebody who came in at 8. So Ash, do you want to say about, if we conclude now, about how you're going to make the video available?
Yeah, so thank you so much. Have you finished, Helen and Claire? Is there anything else that you'd like to mention, or we'll close up now?
Only one very quick thing to a lady who asked, yes, I did hear all the women on Irish radio and the Joe Duffy Drive Time show. I have listened to it on the podcast. Fly the flag for the women of Ireland as well.
Well done, Helen. No, thank you very much for asking us to speak, and I hope it's been helpful, is all I'd like to say.
Thank you. It's been
Thank
great
you.
to see you. Thank you, Ash, and thank
Great
you
to see so
everyone for
many
dialing in.
faces. Yeah.
Thank you, both of you, and the feedback on the chat. Thank you everyone for your feedback. That's really good to know that you want to have more of these sessions. Please fill out our feedback form, which will land in your inbox tomorrow, because it's through the results of that feedback form that we will be able to get Helen and Claire back again to do another deep dive. So thank you very much indeed for that. That was really, really good, so insightful. Well done to Gaetano, who sat all the way through that and has probably learned an awful lot from this evening. And we will send out a link. We have a new menopause section on the Restless website, which is really exciting. And Elise, who writes all our content, who's on the call tonight as well, has posted some various new articles about the menopause on the new section. Please take a look. It's in the health section on restless.co.uk. Hopefully there's some useful info in there for you. We'll send out the presentation from tonight in tomorrow's email as well. And in a few days' time, a recording of tonight's session will also go on the Restless website. If I know there were a few people who weren't able to join from the very beginning, so if you'd like to revisit any of the things that we've covered, you'll be able to do that via the video. I think that's everything. Thank you all so much for joining. It's been lovely to see you all, and we will hopefully see you again.